So we're just waiting a couple of minutes for people to come in, and then we'll start the presentation.
So for those of you just joining, we are just waiting a couple more minutes for people to join. We did have a technical issue, so thank you all for bearing with us. If anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will go through them towards the end of the event. Speaking of technical issues, Mike, I believe you're using the chat from the previous event. So I did see a message pop up saying hi. Just make sure that you're in this event. Okay, everyone, I'm going to give it until 5 past because I'm feeling generous, and then we will start.
Are we recording this for people to see afterwards?
Yes.
Cool.
Not quite sure how you do that. I think it is actually just recording on its own. So.
I think right at the start when you set it up, it does it. So.
Yeah, it's automatic, Demi.
Great.
Lovely. Let's not have any more issues with Teams, shall we?
Yeah, so we'll send out the recording and the slides to everyone when it's finished.
Well, right, okay, so it is 5 past now. Hello everybody that is here. Thank you very much for attending our webinar today. As you know, this is a G4C Construction Excellence webinar.
Yeah, so welcome everyone to the G4C NEC webinar, which is sponsored by East Riding Infrastructure and Facilities. We hope you're all well, first off, and for those attending our events for the first time, myself and Demi will just be going through a PowerPoint for around 10 minutes to just speak about G4C, and then Mike will begin the webinar, and then there will be time at the end to go through any questions. So this is myself and Demi, who are the co-chairs of G4C Yorkshire and Humber.
I work for East Riding Infrastructure and Facilities, and Lydia works for Henry Boot Construction.
Okay, so what is G4C? So we're a young professionals group within the industry that welcomes all professions. We are a network that wants our young professionals to have a voice and shape the future generations in our industry. So this is just the national structure that we have for G4C. So we have committees all across the UK, and one of the benefits of virtual webinars is that anyone from anywhere in the UK can join. So if you are in any of these regions, then you can connect with your committee and see what's happening in your area.
So G4C is an organisation for students, graduates and professionals. Its focus is to be a driving force for the future of the built environment industry. We want to give young people the platform to voice their ideas and aspirations, and G4C allows you to keep up to date with the latest trends and adaptations across all sectors and disciplines. Here are some photos of our in-person event, which feel like a lifetime ago. But here at our events, we aim to inspire the next generation by connecting them with leaders of the industry, sorry. So together we can shape the future minds. We like to include informal networking opportunities as well, because as young professionals, we'd always like to have a good time. As G4C is multidisciplinary, we do have links with external organisations across all of the sectors.
Okay, so what does G4C actually do? So we run CPDs and training and social events, and now with this day and age we are doing webinars. So this is our first webinar as well, so hopefully everyone enjoys it. We collaborate with schools, colleges and universities to engage with the next generation. We have direct involvement with industry as our members are multidisciplinary. We promote the next generation's ambitions to the current leaders, and we engage with other regions to promote, understand and develop what G4C can achieve nationally.
So G4C can expand your professional network and develop your industry knowledge through engagement with like-minded people. We can assist you with professional body requirements through the CPD sessions, which are accessed through low-cost, high-quality training. We can promote your organisation's commercial objectives as well and assist you in building your professional identity by developing key skills.
So these are just some of our previous events that we have done. As you can see, it's a mixture of socials and seminars. And then there's just a little section on what we're planning for the future. So make sure you keep updated with all our events and yeah, hopefully attend them all.
So at G4C, we also like to recognise and appreciate young talent and help to shape your career through our annual awards. These provide an exclusive opportunity for Yorkshire and Humber to showcase their outstanding talent and reveal our future leaders of the construction industry. I believe we have started to send out the awards leaflets for you guys to fill out. I believe there's over 10 categories, so please do get involved. It's always such a fantastic event, and we are still trying to do it as a live event this year in October, all being well. So we hope to see you there. So any questions, do feel free to get in touch with myself or Lydia. And now I'd like to introduce you to Mike Raven. He is an NEC3 accredited project manager with 15 years experience using various forms of the contract, including advising authorities across Yorkshire region on its implementation as part of the construction procurement. He is a chartered construction manager, the MCIOB, and holds an MSc in construction project management. We would also like to thank ERI&F and Your Hub for making this event possible. And if you do have any questions, please use the comments box and we will look through those at the end of the session. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Mike, if you'd like to share your screen with me.
Absolutely. So hopefully that's coming through for everyone now, is for the webinar presentation. So yes, hi. I'm Mike. So I'm the Principal Project Manager within East Riding Infrastructure and Facilities. So we're the delivery arm of East Riding Yorkshire Council when it comes to construction projects. Today I'll be giving a very swift canter through the NEC3 contract. Now this is only a taster on NEC3, that's the only thing you can do in half an hour. I do welcome questions at the end, and if anyone would like a more detailed presentation, do feel free to get in touch. My email address is available at the end as well. So I am going to be skimming through slides quite quickly. With the session being recorded, it does mean that you can go back and focus on any particular bit that you might want. And so I hope that all makes sense. So a couple of thanks that I need to give, which Demi's kindly already hinted at. So firstly, I have to say I'm delighted to have been asked by G4C to run this session. And for anyone not currently involved in G4C, I would really urge you to get in touch with Demi and Lydia. You know, I've been working with G4C for quite a number of years now. It's helped me massively over the years, and I'm sure would do the same for anyone. Two organisations I need to mention today. So the first is ERI&F. We are, as I say, East Riding Yorkshire Council's delivery arm. We also do provide our services to both private and public sectors. So if you are looking for consultancy support of any kind on a construction project, do get in touch. Secondly, Your Hub, who is a provider of a suite of regional construction frameworks, mainly Yorkshire and Humber based, but they do also operate as far north as Berwick and through into the entirety of Lincolnshire. So at East Riding Yorkshire Council, they are our default procurement route and provide us with access to and advice on NEC3 suite of contracts. And this presentation wouldn't have been possible without them. So thank you. So just as a kind of an introductory note, because, you know, if you get technical into the contract, there's works and services. We're looking at construction work, so things you build. And a little bit of a health warning I have to give is I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a practitioner of the contract. There's a lot more detail, which I'm not going to go into today. So, you know, don't rely on this for legal or professional advice. If you're looking for that, then by all means, give me a shout afterwards and we can see if we can help you. So why do we use a standard form of contract? Well, it makes it easier for construction professionals to administer, as they only have to learn a limited number of contract types, and it saves on time drafting bespoke contracts. Just looking at contract usage, so on the slide I've got up here, JCT and NEC are the two most commonly used contracts in the UK. The NEC, or New Engineering Contract, was first published in 1991. It's now in its 4th edition, which was published in 2017. Now, today we're talking about NEC3, the 3rd edition. Now, the differences between 3 and 4 aren't huge, and I am going to briefly mention those at the end of the presentation, just to kind of give a guide as to how the contract has evolved. Reason for using NEC, it is endorsed by various organisations, such as the Government and Construction Board within the Cabinet Office, and as I say, within our organisation at East Riding, it is very much our default contract of choice. And I think that's true of a lot of the public sector. Now, the NEC contract is designed to be used. It's not a contract that you're supposed to store away in the back of a cupboard and only get out when there's a problem. It's the use of the contract should be continuous throughout the life of a construction scheme. The language is intended to be clear and simple, so it's easy to understand, and it's intended to support good project management. It puts in place processes for both the PM and the contractor to take and how to resolve issues. So you're not just kind of wandering through a scheme and then when you hit a problem, then you get the contract out to see what you're supposed to do. As with JCT, to be fair, the NEC is a family of contracts for different relationships. So you've got subcontracts, short contracts, professional contracts. Today we're focusing on the main one, which is the ECC, or engineering and construction contract. But the way that the NEC is set up, so it has common clause numbering across the contract, so it's easy for an NEC practitioner to move from one contract to another one. So as an example, section 3 of the contract talks about the programme, and that's exactly the same regardless of what contract you're getting out. It's always going to be there, so it makes it easier for you to manage. It has defined terms, so these are words and phrases that begin with an initial capital letter, and these are defined at the start of the contract. So examples of defined terms could be site information, completion, a defect, And we also have identified terms, which is appearing in italics in the contract. And these are things like the employer, contractor, the project manager, and the supervisor. Incidentally, those are kind of the four key people or organisations referred to throughout the contract. So if you're using NEC, you'll very quickly get familiar with the use of those four terms. It's worth picking up on some key terms that are used within the NEC and that you might hear today in my presentation. So I'm not running through all of these at all because there's quite a list here, but just to pick on some examples. So works information. This is what the contractor has to do in order to complete the works. In NEC 4, it's been renamed as a scope, which I think is a little bit clearer. But it's effectively whatever the contractor has to do to complete the contract. Site information, so this tells the contractor about the site that they're working on, and the contractor is expected to have allowed for within their price for delivering the work in line with the site information. So an example of site information could be a ground investigation report that would inform what the foundations are going to be like on the building, or it could be a drawing showing where utilities are buried so the contractor knows where to avoid digging. Early warning, and we'll talk a lot more about early warning in a bit. This is a notification sent by either the PM or the contractor to the other, warning of an event that might potentially impact on the project. Change to the works information, which is commonly called a PMI or a project manager's instruction. This is a notification sent by the PM to the contractor changing something in the works information, such as changing the colour of carpet in an office being built. And finally, the last one I'll pick out is compensation events. So there is within the contract a list of events which, if they occur, means that the time and cost due to the contractor can change. So an example of this would be a change to the works information. So taking the example previously, if your PM changes an inexpensive carpet to a bit more of a luxurious carpet, which would cost the contractor more to buy, that will be a compensation event for the contractor to claim the uplifting cost. Just as a note, on any construction project, there's a cornucopia of PMs. The client might have a PM who's responsible for obtaining funding. There might be a client PM who deals with stakeholders. You could have a Prince 2 PM who could well be what we're talking about today. Contractor may well have a PM running the job, and even subcontractors might bring a PM to be responsible for their section of the job. So what we're specifically talking about today is project manager as defined within the NEC contract, which is typically similar to a Prince 2 project manager. They have control over the job and they're a key sort of person with their relationship with the contractor. So they're giving instructions to the contractor and managing the work accordingly. The NEC contract is considered a collaborative contract, and this is indicated within the very first clause within the contract here, which emphasises that organisations and people stated here should work together. So spirit of mutual trust and cooperation. The NEC contract also provides options for partnering, allowing other organisations to be brought into the contract, such as a specialist subcontractor whose input might be essential for a certain project. So it is very much, it's intended that the parties work together to deliver the project. It's not, being contractual under NEC isn't a bad thing. It's what you're supposed to do. Just talking about the contract structure then. So the NEC is set up a bit like a sort of shopping list with a bit of pick and mix at the end. So you have the core clauses at the top of the slide here, and these are in every contract. So these are central, and as I say, the core clause numbering is common across the forms of contract. So, you know, item 5, which is payments, that's the same. It's always section 5 is payment, regardless of whatever NEC contract you get. So you've got your core clauses. You choose one of a list of main options, which we'll look at in a moment, and then you can choose as many or as few of the secondary options as you like. So it's an easy way for you to customize your contract without, again, having to draft bespoke clauses or worrying about how what you're putting in interacts with the rest of the contract. So there's 6 main options which we'll briefly run through. A and B are fixed price, so the tenderer submits a price for doing the work, and if their tender is accepted, that's what the employer pays. C and D are target contracts. So these are used where it's difficult to define the extent of the work. An example of this, which I worked on a few years ago, was a scheme where a contractor was to install external wall insulation to a number of houses, but the extent of the insulation hadn't been measured, so the contractor didn't know, how many square meters were they going to cover in insulation, so they couldn't give an exact price. So instead, a target price is agreed, and then the contractor gets paid effectively on a cost reimbursable basis up to that target. And if at the end of the scheme the contractors come in under the target, the gain is then shared between the main contractor and the employer, and equally if he comes in over the target, the pain is shared between the contractor and the employer. So it's very much a partnering sort of arrangement there. Option E is purely cost reimbursable, so the employer pays whatever cost is incurred by the contractor. Now this is financially relatively high risk to the employer, and an example of where we might use this is like an emergency situation. So for example, after a building is flooded, you might use an option E to get a contractor in to dewater the building and make good any damage if it's time critical and you don't want to be arguing about cost. And then option F, which is fairly rarely used in my experience, this is a management contract, so it's where the contractor is only taken on to manage the works rather than delivering the works themselves. Just a touch on, you'll see also there's reference to an activity schedule and a bill of quantities. So just to explain the difference between those two. So an activity schedule is a list of activities that the contractor is paid for as they complete them. So an activity might be pour the foundations, or it might be get the roof onto a building. So once they've done that activity, they price that activity and they get paid that amount, and it's non-remeasurable. With a bill of quantities, they will be given quantities for it. So rather than saying pour foundations, it might be pour 50 cube of concrete, and that is a remeasurement contract under B and D. So if the contractor finds out that they actually need to pour 60 cube, then they will be entitled to an uplift, and equal if they end up only pouring 40 cube, then theoretically the price will come down as well.
Sorry, Mike, I don't want to interrupt, but we have just realised that people are unable to send us messages for questions. Obviously, we really wanted it to have a panel discussion with you at the end. If people can, please do send us emails, and me and Lydia will receive those and we'll do it that way. And we're sorry for any inconvenience. But carry on, Mike, it's going great.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. OK, and then just looking at the secondary options then. So I won't go into these in detail, but these are because as you can see, there's quite a list of them, but these are the secondary options within the contract. And as I mentioned, it's a pick and mix, so you can choose as many or as few of these as you want. So as example, so X5, sectional completion. So this allows a contract to have multiple completion dates. So you might use this, for example, where a contract is to build more than one building, or there might be part of it that you want the employer to take over because that's going to be done before the rest of it. That's the sort of example. So kind of the key kind of details within the contract are stored within contract data part 1 and part 2. So these are completed by the parties forming the contract. So part 1 is completed by the employer, part 2 is completed by the contractor. I'll just go a couple of very quick examples. So this is an example of a bit of a part 1, just to explain it. So this is showing it's a job that I did a while back. So it shows what the main option is, the secondary options we've chosen, who the employer is, who the PM is. It might detail what the delayed damages are going to be applied. So all that information is available to the contractor, and it will inform them how they price the job. And then contract data part 2 is effectively the contractor's response to part 1. So they detail here who their key people are, what fee percentages they're charging, that sort of information. Sometimes it's a completion date. If the employer hasn't set a completion date, then the contractor can respond and say, we're going to complete it by this date. Now, early warnings are a key kind of proactive management tool available to both the PM and the contractor within the NEC form of contract. It mandates that both the PM and the contractor need to highlight to each other any issues which they believe have the potential to increase the prices, delay completion, or meet a key date, or impair the performance of the works in use. In simple terms, you know, for a PM, it's time, cost, quality. So it's anything that affects one of those three items. Now, this is an example of a risk register used within an NEC3. So you can see it details what the risk is, the action to be taken to avoid the risk, who's going to do that action and when. Now, the term risk register can mean other things in a construction project. So quite often a client might have a project risk register to track a contingency sum for problems that might occur during the job. So it can be a little bit confusing. In NEC4, they've actually renamed the risk register as the early warning register. And I must admit, even when I'm administering an NEC3 job, I tend to call it an early warning register just because it saves any kind of confusion. Now, we're going to look at two examples of early warnings and how they could be handled under the contract. Now, we're looking at COVID and Brexit because I promised these when we were setting up the webinar. I'm going to go a little bit geeky into the contract here because there's a lot to talk about how these two items in particular can be handled. So I've tried to put a bit of particular effort into this. So I'm not saying that this isn't specific to any construction project. So it could be that what I'm saying here is totally different depending on your job. But just to give the examples then, so scenario A, so the contractor raises an early warning to the PM. Now, for example, for COVID, it might say something like the current lockdown relating to COVID-19 has the potential to restrict the ability for workers to attend site due to illness, due to shielding requirements. It restricts suppliers being able to supply materials and means additional cost will be incurred due to the need for social distancing on site. And in their early warning, the contractor might ask for a risk reduction meeting to be held. They don't have to, you know, an early warning can just be a notification, but quite often, particularly if it's a key risk, that, you know, either the PM or the contractor will say, look, we need to have a risk reduction meeting. We need to sit down and talk this through and agree what we're going to do. So a risk reduction meeting is held between the PM and the contractor, discussing the issue, coming up with measures to avoid or reduce the risks. Following that meeting, the project manager updates the risk register that we've just looked at, issues this to the contractor, so everyone's got a copy of it. If there are any changes to works information, so it might be the PM has agreed to change what the works are going to be to make it easier to construct. The PM also instructs these changes along with the risk register. Now, as to what the decisions are going to be and whether COVID will incur additional risks to the employer or the contractor depends on the nature of the project. It depends when the contractor submitted their tender and when the early warning was issued. So my personal view, which is only hypothetical and individual contracts may directly contradict this, will be that unless the contract was signed before the first UK lockdown back in March 2020, the contractor knew that there was going to be some impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their works. And as time has gone on, more details have become more obvious. So the Construction Leadership Council, they've been producing guidance on working with COVID-19, started back last March, and I think we're on version 6 or 7 by now, in fact, of the guidance. So it wouldn't be unreasonable for the PM to say, right, you had your contract signed on at this point in time. During that point in time, the CLC guidance was this, so surely you would have allowed for that. It's not to say that the contractor wouldn't be able to claim for some changes, depending on how the contract's set up. So there is a secondary option specifically for changes in law. So if the UK government has put into place new laws to enforce a lockdown, they might impact on the contractor and they could claim under that. If the CLC guidance has changed and the contractors had to allow for the new guidance, which might be stricter than the old guidance, again, that's a potential claim that could be looked at. Now, I did also mention about when the early warning was issued. This plays quite a significant role. So if an early warning wasn't issued and then the contractor runs into difficulties due to COVID-19 and that an experienced contractor could have anticipated, this affects how the compensation events are assessed. So in simple terms, if the contractor should have known about a problem and didn't flag it up, it strengthens the PM's argument the contractor must have allowed for dealing with that item. So, you know, if a contractor is well aware the COVID's going on, but doesn't raise it as an early warning, gets to the end of the job and says, oh, by the way, you know, we've because of COVID, we've had to, you know, work slower on site and we've had to get extra people in and X, Y, and Z. Here's our claim for cost. You know, the contractors, the PM has got quite a strong argument to say, well, hang on, you knew about COVID months ago. Why didn't you tell me about it then? Because then we could have done something about it, maybe. So it's very it's not cut and dry, but that's kind of my thinking on like a stereotypical project, as it were. And then the second example, which is a little bit quicker, don't worry, I'm not going to take half an hour on each of these. So the second one is Brexit. Now the process is exactly the same. So the contractor or the PM should raise an early warning to the other about Brexit. There's a risk reduction meeting if they want, and any decisions are then recorded in a risk register and instructions issued as appropriate. As to what those decisions will be, then again, strictly my personal view, based on hypothetical situation, Brexit is in itself very unlikely to be something that a contractor can claim on, because everyone's been well aware of Brexit happening for a number of years now, and it would be expected that an experienced contractor would have allowed for it. However, again, any further changes in the law, which UK government is issuing new regulations, you know, as a result of leaving the EU, that can result in a compensation event. I mean, putting claims to one side, what you would hope that in that risk reduction meeting is you're not sitting there arguing why you entitled to more money. The risk reduction meeting should be there to try and make decisions to get around the risks. So it could be that the contractor is really struggling to source a particular product because it's been made in the EU and for whatever reason he's struggling to import it. So it could be that in that meeting you agree to change the works information, buy a different product that's sourced in the UK, just as an example. But I hope that kind of explains how the early warning risk register mechanism works. So the other kind of key section I wanted to pick up on was the programme. So the programme is the beating heart of the NEC, and it's probably I would have to say, in my experience, probably the most poorly understood bit of the contract. Simply put, the accepted programme is used to assess delays and extensions to the contract. I'm just going to run through an example of a contract and how it's supposed to work under NEC. So here's an example of a very much simplified NEC program for building a house. Now, as I say, under the NEC, managing the program is key, and it is quite often misunderstood. Basically, the program is reviewed and updated as the project progresses and should take into account the effect of compensation events, so e.g. events that affect the time or cost of the scheme. It should also track the contractor's actual progress versus what they stated at the start of the contract. Now, just to kind of pick up on, you can see on this example here, you've got a start date, you've got a number of activities, and then at the end you've got two dates, which I've termed as a practical completion date, i.e. when is the contractor actually going to finish, and the contract completion date, which is what's the last date the contractor is in time, you know, contractually they should finish. So two kind of examples of how the program can change. So the first one we've got, in this alteration to the program, the superstructure activity has gone from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. The reason is the contractor built the walls using the wrong bricks, and now they've had to get the right bricks and they're having to rebuild the walls. As a result, the practical completion date has pushed back 2 weeks because in reality, the job's not going to be done for another 2 weeks. But the contract completion date has stayed put because it's not the fault of the PM or the employer. It's not that side's issue that there's a delay to the project, and therefore, if the contract includes delay damages, the contractor is facing having to pay for 2 weeks of delay damages in this situation. assuming that everything else is equal and there's no other change to the contract. So I hope that kind of one, that's one example. Now the other example is with a compensation event. So sorry, just skip past the slide, my apologies. So the second example shows how the program changes when a compensation event or CE occurs. So in this example, the ground conditions on site are worse than expected. So e.g. what was stated in the site information. So as a result, the contractor has to pour the foundations a second time. So what's been done here is the contractor shows on the program the compensation event. So you see that little rectangle in red, that's the CE, and this is affecting both the practical completion date and the contract completion date. So it's giving the contractor the additional time that compensation event has raised. And that's kind of in a nutshell how the program works. So as long as you're accurately tracking actual progress of the project and you're including in the program your CEs and showing how the CE impacts on the completion date, on the contract completion date, that's kind of all you have to do. And it's not unusual for a CE to actually not impact on the contract completion date. It might be that it's been instructed early enough that the job can be reprogrammed, or the activity that you're affecting isn't on the critical path, so it's not affecting that contract completion date. So in a very, very small nutshell, but that is program, which, as I say, that is the key thing which we do seem to struggle on administering within the NEC. Just a kind of a note on completion and kind of defects, just, you know, so if people are wondering how that works. So completion is defined as per the slide. So it's when the contractor has done everything that the work information says that they are to do by the completion date, and fixed notified defects which would have prevented the employer from using the works and others from doing their work. So just to kind of pick up on that, it's important to note that it's not necessarily 0 defects at completion. You can add into the contract details of what your definition of completion is, and you might do that as an employee. You might say, I want 0 defects. But if you don't, the kind of the default wording is the contractor needs to have finished the work, and any major defects basically that prevent the use of the works have been sorted. So you might still have some minor defects. You might still have, you know, a room where maybe a storeroom where the decoration just needs touching up, that sort of thing. And then post completion, there's a defects period, which is specified by the employer, during which the contractor has to correct defects within a specified defect correction period. So it might be, for example, that you have a defects period of a year, and then during that year, the contractor can be notified of defects as they're identified, and then they have to come back and fix them, perhaps within 2 weeks. Or it might be that you set up multiple defect correction periods depending on what the defect is. So, you know, if it's a boiler, then you naturally want the contractor to attend quickly because you're affecting the heating of the building. If it's, you know, taking the example previously, if it's a bit of decoration in a storeroom, then you maybe not in quite so much of a rush for them to correct it. So I'm just going to kind of touch on NEC 4 and the changes between 3 and 4, and then we'll drop back, and if there's any questions, quite happy to handle them. So NEC 4, kind of summarise on this slide some of the key points. Although there's a lot more detail that really, you know, you'd want to go into on this, but it was launched June 2017. There was a couple of new contracts added in just to broaden the offer. Communication route can now be specified. So under NEC 3, it's basically a communication must be in a form that can be read, copied, transmitted. So this could be a letter, it could be an email, it could be a WhatsApp message even. What they're now allowing you to do is specify what the route is going to be, which I think is better and tighter, because, you know, a lot of us use a specific system. For example, we currently use Autodesk BIM 360 Docs as our formal communication system between us and our contractors. But a contractor could argue that if I send them an email, or as I say, even a WhatsApp message, that's also a communication under the contract. So it just helps it be formalized a little bit. There's a default and program acceptance, which, again, talking about programs, quite often one frustration is PMs not accepting programs when there's no issues with them, or not giving the reasons why they're not accepting the program. So under NEC 4, I believe the default is after 2 weeks. If they've not accepted the program, it's treated as though they did accept it. So it just gives a bit more security to contractors. Payment mechanism has been updated to bring it in line with kind of current UK practices, and there's also a final account mechanism added. There shouldn't be a need for a final account mechanism under NEC, because the way it works is, as long as you're agreeing the costs as you're going through the job, when you get to the end, you've already agreed all the prices and it's all sorted. But the reality is, quite often you do need some kind of final account meeting to get everything up to date. So there is that mechanism in there now. Contractors can claim for the cost of preparing quotes for proposed instructions. So what you can do under the NEC is, rather than giving a change to the works information, you can give the contractor a proposed instructions and ask them what will be the impact of implementing this instruction. So how much would it delay us? What will be the cost impact? And in theory, a PM could bombard a contractor with loads of proposed instructions that's taking their QS time to cost and respond to. So they can now claim for the cost of preparing those, which I think is a positive. Under NEC 4, contractors now have a list of risks. So under NEC 3, there's a list of risks which the employer has to take on, nothing for the contractor. Now both sides have a list. There's been a dispute avoidance board added, which again I think is a positive addition to the contract. So where you are in a situation where the PM and the contractor do not agree, you can then it gets referred automatically to a dispute avoidance board before going through any more formal route, such as litigation or adjudication. So that's a positive. There's more secondary options added, so they've added in ones for BIM, for early contractor involvement, confidentiality. Retention has been tweaked a bit, so now you can have a retention bond if you want, which again it just gives a bit more flexibility and options for your PM to administer the contract. So again, it's positive. Various tweakings to wording to make it clearer, so those references from working information to scope. For changing risk register to early warning register, I think that's all positive. And the other one, which under NEC 3, you can have 2 different fee percentages. So there's a different fee percentage effectively. There's one for the main contractor themselves, and there can be another one for the subcontractors, and it can get quite confusing. So they've just moved to a single fee percentage, which again I think is a positive. So that is an extremely rapid. And I apologise if I've gone too quickly through anything. I do apologise for that. But that is a look at the NEC contract. If we've got any questions, I would welcome them. I'll stop presenting if I can.
It's okay. We can just leave that up. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really insightful, and yeah, there was a lot of information there, but thankfully it's recorded and I'm sure I'll be back over it. We've been getting a lot of questions through. We've been using the Slack channel and emails, so I will just start by asking some. Unfortunately, I think we've lost Lydia on this call, so it's going to... Oh, Lydia,
I'm still here.
Hey, finally. So I've got some questions for you, Mike. The first is, why hasn't NEC 4 been widely adopted, and when do you envisage the transition to take place?
That's fine. So I mean the reason certainly for us why we haven't moved to NEC 4 is, so as referred to at the start, we work with Your Hub, who provide a suite of regional construction frameworks. Now, the way the framework agreements are set up is they're set up over a number of years. So, quite often 4 years, for example. This is really good because it saves us a huge amount in terms of effort when it comes to procurement, because we just have to do this framework once every 4 years rather than doing constantly major procurements. But what it also does is it allows us to build up working relationships with our contractors. So, over that 4-year period, we can work with the contractor on numerous different projects. So that, and that's great because it means that they learn how we operate, we learn how they operate, and it just makes everything run a little bit smoother. Now, that's all positive. Now, the side effect of that is the way the framework works is at the start of the framework, the contractor prices the framework as it stands. So at the time of, for example, Your Build 2, which is one of the frameworks I use a lot, at the time of Your Build 2 being priced, NEC 4 wasn't around, so it was still NEC 3. So the contractors could only price NEC 3, and I think they priced JCT as well, just for completeness. So I know that with Your Hub, they've got a very busy year, sort of year 18 months ahead of them, re-procuring a lot of their frameworks as they're now coming up to their expiry dates, and I'm confident that NEC 4 is being brought into them. I think apart from the framework thing, there's always a slight fear about a new form of contract and the need for training on it. I mean, a number of my team have been on training for NEC 4, and we're quite relaxed with the evolution of the contract. It's not massive changes. It seems better, everything that's been put in it. So we're quite happy to take on NEC 4 when it's ready.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for that, Mike. So we've got a great question from Reese here. So he says, what do you think are the major factors behind why NEC has become the second most used contract within the industry, and why do you think it has not become the most used contract ahead of JCT?
That's a good question, Reese. I will do my best to answer that. I mean, it's important to know that I've been at East Riding for 18, 19 years now, so my experience is all East Riding, and with East Riding, it's always been at NEC pretty much. We occasionally do JCT, but it's not often. I think the NEC is very, very popular within public sector because it has got those endorsements from the likes of the Cabinet Office, which kind of leads you down. Why aren't you using NEC? And I could be wrong, but I did have a glance at the construction playbook recently, and I think that might have made some mention to using NEC as well. So there's a lot of best practice recommendations that you should use NEC, and that has helped the implementation of NEC. But I think there's still, there's always a fear of unknown, to be quite honest. And on the flip side, I'm sure that JCT contracts have got many, many positive features to them. I've never used a JCT, so I would naturally be a little bit nervous, I guess, about using the JCT, just because I would have to learn it and read up on it and become familiar with it to be confident in administering a JCT contract. So I think when you've got an organisation who is trained in JCT contract administration, there's always that question: do you want to go through that change process to move on to NEC, which could be an unknown? I think it's also worth kind of bearing in mind that NEC has come out of, ultimately it's come from the ICE, so engineering wise possibly a little bit more popular, whilst JCT tends to be a little bit more building focused. I guess the background of building, they assume JCT by default. So yeah, it's a difficult one to say, and we've seen the use of NEC fluctuate greatly in the last few years. There's been some years the slide which I put up at early doors. I think if you look at the same survey in 2016, NEC usage was a lot higher. So yeah, difficult one for me to answer, to be honest, Reese, but I hope that's kind of given some highlight indication as to what I think.
Yeah, there was quite a few people actually that were asking similar things, like why NEC over JCT, and obviously it is a great discussion, and you could go on for, I'm sure, a lot longer than we've got. Caroline has just sent a message, and I think it's in response to what you were just saying. So she asked, so the frameworks are hampering progress. Does this make sense to you?
I would disagree that they're hampering progress. I think it's, well, when and I have a little bit of background working with the frameworks, and the difficulty, as I say, is that at the start it's only fair to get the contractors to price what is available at that time. So at that time, NEC 3 was available, NEC 4 wasn't. So it will be, and you can't. I'm not going to go too deep into the public procurement regulations, but it can get very tricky then adding a new form of contract in, because what you could face a situation where you've appointed contractors who have onto the framework who have priced most competitively using NEC 3, If you then go and try and advertise via the framework an NEC4 job, a contractor who hasn't got on the framework theoretically has got opportunity to claim and say, well, if we'd known you was going to do NEC4, we would have been far more competitive than those who offer NEC3. Now, whether that's a real challenge or not is something I would leave up to a lawyer to decide, but that's the kind of issue. And I think, you know, that I recognise the issue that the frameworks do take, you know, they are a number of years in existence. So in theory, there's always developments, you know, constantly, you know, throughout the construction sector, and you can only take a snapshot at that time when you're procuring the framework. But I would say those working relationships with the contractors, there is a great deal generally to be gained from those. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that they're hampering progress.
Yeah, Caroline just then added saying not adopting NEC4, but I think we're going to move on to a question that we had from Chris Shaw. So it's a little bit similar, and I just want you to kind of add anything in response. So he's asked, why do you think in some parts of the industry there's reluctance to use NEC, given the perception it takes more time to administer? In our view, it's a good PM tool and should be considered good practice. So I don't know if we've been basically saying that, but if there's anything else to add for Chris's question, that would be great. Yeah,
no, that's fine. And yeah, I think the thing I'd add to that, so yeah, for Chris, and he's kind of hinted at it, to be honest. I mean, Chris, you know the answer to this. You know, NEC3 is really positive in that it requires ongoing management of the contract, and as a result of that, in theory, when you come to the end of the job, you're done and dusted, and you shake hands, and hopefully everyone's, you know, Caroline's got a job that they want, contractor made a bit of money, and everyone walks away happy. With other forms of contract, and again, my familiarity with JCT is less, so apologies to any JCT kind of experts who disagree with what I'm saying, but my understanding is that quite often on a JCT project, you know, the claims arrangement gets left until the end of the scheme, and then there's a long debate about, you know, what the claims are, what the claims should be, and which ones are acceptable and which ones aren't. So whilst there's more work throughout the life of the NEC, you know, hopefully you get to the end of the scheme and then you can sign everything it's done just and walk away. Whilst with JCT, you can, as I understand it, and apologies to I'm sure there's many JCT practitioners listening who will say, no, we don't work like this. But as I understand it, under JCT, you can, to a degree, leave things until the end and then have an ongoing debate as to what the final account should be, for example.
Right. And NEC, obviously, because it's a constant backwards and forwards, and you should obviously be monitoring all the decisions, all of the issues. That's the way of avoiding it. That's the difference then. Yeah,
exactly. Okay. I mean, if I take the example of where, you know, we're assuming, you know, we've all done college assignments and the like. Yeah, we all know that what you should do is you should do a bit of work, chip away at the assignment from when you get it issued, so you get it completed, you know, ideally well ahead the handing date.
Yeah.
My approach is wait until the night before and then stay up all night writing the assignment. And then, you know, and we all know that's the wrong answer. So don't give me that situation. Give me NEC, which forces me to administer it all the way throughout the contract, because otherwise I will leave it all till the end, and I would then find it really, really hard to do a good job of it.
I'm just going to add one more thing before Lydia, I know she's got one more question and then we're going to wrap up. It's just speaking from a designer's perspective. I know that the NEC gets left to our project managers in our office, but thinking of what you're just saying, NEC allows us to make adaptations as needed so the designers can remain involved and try and come up with not just the best cost approach, but the best quality approach to issues that are raised. Whereas obviously if you add the JCT and the PMs and the quantity surveyors are arguing towards the end, then obviously we're not going to get the greatest design always from it. So that's kind of what I've picked up from this. And like you say, we're not professionals with the JCT, so maybe we might be wrong, but that's really interesting. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good point. And I think of a job at the moment where I've asked the contractor to do some additional works, and they've come back with a proposal which is quite, you know, it's quite costly. But because of the NEC and the way we're working backwards and forwards, they've come up with their details, and I'd be able to say, well, actually, that's not quite what we want, you know, and here's a cheaper way, in my view, of us achieving what we would want. What do you think to it? So you've got that conversation going. So hopefully we'll get something we're both happy with.
Real.
Lydia? Have we got time for one more?
Yeah, one more and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so this is quite an interesting one. So do you find early warnings are overused and therefore don't become effective because each element becomes an argument rather than open collaboration and negotiation procedure?
I mean, it can do, is the honest answer. That can be the situation. It's not how it's supposed to be used. You know, the early warning is supposed to be just highlighting to the other party that, look, there's something here which might cause a problem down the line, and it might be something that both parties have nothing any kind of control over. So COVID, for example, you know, it's totally beyond the control of the employer and the contractor, but we should still have a chat to agree how we're going to try and best deal with it. I think, regardless of the contract mechanism you use, you know, if you're minded to try and use a contract to poke at the other party and, you know, try and create arguments, there's always going to be a way for you to do that. But it's kind of dependent on the people involved to try and avoid that becoming the situation. And I have to say, I mean, human nature comes into play here. You know, it's all well and good me talking about theoreticals, but, you know, if I receive an early warning from a contractor, you know, sometimes it is hard to not go on the defensive, and you have to try and look past and go, no, I'm not here to defend my corner. They've quite rightly highlighted the potential issue here. I need to consider it and respond professionally.
Fantastic. Mike, you have been an exceptional speaker today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope all of our attendees have enjoyed it as well. For anyone that does want to have any follow-ups with myself or Lydia, we can always put you in contact with Mike if you've got any further questions. But other than that, thank you so much for coming today. Again, apologies for the link mess up at the beginning, but it's been a really successful event, and I can't wait until we do our next one.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and keep up to date with our next event.
Okay, take care everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Mike.